Entrepreneurship is not for everybody. It's way more difficult than I ever thought it was going to be. It's really, really tough. And I can only imagine how much tougher it would be or how impossible it would be if you don't actually understand the space or the people that you're selling into. I think it would be next to impossible. So understand the space, really find key differentiators and moat. We want people to take the same journey with us. We don't need a lot of direction or hand-holding in terms of what we're trying to do, but we do need people that will support us and be there with the good times and be there with the bad times.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Built Not Born, the startup go-to-market podcast by Venture Guides. I'm Sage Nye, and around here, we believe that great companies are built, not born, one smart decision at a time. Each week, we take you through real conversations with founders, investors, and go-to-market experts on what it really takes to land customers and scale your startup. Now, let's get to work. Hello, and welcome to Built Not Born, the podcast where we dive into the real stories behind startup execution, venture capital, and go-to-market strategy. I'm Sage Nye, venture partner at Venture Guides. Today, we're joined by Stas Bojoukha, founder and CEO of Compyl, an IT GRC company that he founded out of his frustrations as a practitioner and his belief that there has to be a better solution. With a background in engineering and a passion for simplifying complex risk and compliance processes, Stas is leading the charge in helping organizations stay secure and audit-ready without the typical headaches. We'll dive into his journey from startup founder to industry leader, explore how Compyl is transforming compliance into a strategic advantage, and hear his insights on how building resilient companies in a fast-changing tech landscape. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this one. And if you're a founder thinking about what it really takes to scale from early stage to public company and staying sane while doing it, this is your blueprint. Stas, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I do want to start with a little bit about Compyl's creation. You are building a business in a space with both companies like Archer Technologies as well as Vanta and Drata. There are some that would argue that compliance is a solved problem. So why did you build Compyl?
I built Compyl because for my own selfish needs. I'm a former CISO. I'm also an engineer, as you pointed out. So this really came about with having the need of managing a team within like highly regulated space, let's say a bank, and not really understanding where you are from like a risk landscape from a security posture perspective and constantly being asked, where are we with our progress for this framework or this regulation? What is the team working on? Can we run a quick report just to see how compliant this tech stack is or how much progress we made against this regulation? And it was always a spreadsheet that was being sent around. The numbers always completely differentiated between one month to another. And then you're having to explain why the numbers don't make any sense. If there was ever any trending, that also didn't make any sense. So the need really just came about of just being able to put all of the data into a single location and then being able to run analytics and task flow management over top it, which is a little difficult from a security and compliance perspective because they often put you into your own silo and you don't have access to the tech stack and you have very limited resources within an organization. That's just how it's traditionally been. So the way that Compyl actually started off was just taking something like every user within an organization has access to Active Directory. If you've got read access, you can pull all the rest of the data out of Active Directory. So being able to pull user information such as who the user is, are they enabled or not, last time they've logged in, the type of account that they have and the type of group that they belong into. So that gives you like an overall picture of what the organization looks like with the big caveat if their Active Directory is actually maintained and updated properly. But then from there, you can connect other data sets. You can connect in Jira or Confluence to give you an idea of like the type of task flow management that's happening in the documentation. And then you can connect in other types of systems that an organization had. And that's kind of how this whole thing started, was just being able to plug in all of that information into one place, have task flow and workflow management over top of it. And for the first time I ever did this for one of our existing customers now, but I was an employee at that company. But what I had built for them finally fell over after about 7 years after I had built it. And they came back and asked if I had anything where I wanted to come back and contract for them and build something out from scratch. I actually told them we're working on something and they actually ended up being our first customer.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'd love to double click on a couple of things that you brought up there. I do think one of the amazing things about working with you has been that you do have the practitioner's perspective so strongly, and you really built this out of a belief that something can be better. It feels like compliance has had a second coming in recent years, and there's been a lot more focus on it. As a former practitioner, can you provide any context as to why compliance is so important today?
Absolutely. When I started this company in 2020, I didn't think that this was going to become such a hot topic. It's definitely had a resurgence. There's definitely a lot of new players in the space, and it's definitely become very saturated. The reason for that is companies are now in the mindset of expect breach rather than prevent breach. So now it's how do I mitigate and reduce my risk surface? And compliance plays a very big part in that, where a lot of times, even 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, no one really knew what good looked like from a security and compliance perspective. Everybody is kind of doing their own thing. No one really had any playbooks to run off of. And this is barely 10 years old. ISO is from 2013 and they only updated it in 2022. So there's very few playbooks that actually gave practitioners a way to actually be able to compare, what other organizations are doing and what good look like from a security and compliance perspective. And compliance and security are not the same thing, but compliance gives you a good outline of what you should be doing for best practices. And that's really become more and more in focus. And compliance isn't now just being focused on security and IT, but it also now across the board, right? We're seeing it for financial controls, HR, privacy. There's just a lot of new frameworks and regulations, but ultimately it's the same thing. It's being able to comprehend what that framework or regulation is saying, put it into a task, and then being able to track that task. And the easier you can make it, but automating it, the better it is. And I think that's where really, there's a lot of opportunity because it's no longer a nice to have, it's become a must have. And I think that's why there's so much competition now in the space.
And if we think about the shift into from a nice to have to a must have, makes a lot of sense. There are tools that have been on the market for a while. I would say let's use Vanta and Drata as examples. Why can't they meet the needs of customers today?
They serve a purpose. When traditionally SOC 2 and ISO have been reserved for organizations that are, let's say, over 100 people and have proven revenue models and revenue to be able to pay for those. And they traditionally been done with auditors that are the likes of the big four or thereabouts. So they've been quite costly and cost prohibitive to actually get a SOC 2 and ISO. Whereas now, because of the cloud movement that has taken place, it's a lot easier for companies now to build product with cloud. You don't need data centers or infrastructure. You can literally just spin up an entire infrastructure, in a couple of minutes, start building code and start putting things into production very easily. With that, there's a lot of organizations that want to adopt new technology and not be left behind. So they want to be at the forefront, but that comes with a lot of risk. So organizations are looking for some assurances that these small startups have the right practices in place. This is exactly what I was talking about a second ago, where the compliance drives the security initiatives within the organization. So what the Vantas and the Dratos have done is they've allowed organizations to prove out that they do have controls in place for the SOC 2s and ISOs and other frameworks. The problem is that it only goes so far. Like at the end of the day, this is still tough. It's still a complex space with complex solutions. And the more organizations grow and expand, the more complex their security and compliance needs become. So they need platforms that they can grow with and they can scale with, that they can configure as they mature, but also they need the platforms to be company wide rather than just being very specific to just security or compliance or one of their technology employees running that piece of software because it's very simple. I hope that kind of answers the question.
It does. And to the point about company wide, it's not just about number of people in the organization, but it could also be that there's people all over the world. I mean, I know you've lived this personally with a distributed team as well. I think our listeners would love to hear you've had a distributed team from the beginning, and yet you've done a great job really focusing on keeping everyone aligned and united and feeling like one team. Do you have any tactics that you could advise others who are trying to find this balance about how you've done that?
With my co-founder, Simon, we bootstrapped the business for, I think, just over a year. We're just trying to prove out that there was a model for this and that there was appetite for somebody to actually buy the platform. So I think this was like in October of 2019. Funny enough, my co-founder's dad actually ran a offshoring company in the Philippines. So that's kind of how we got our start. And we hired our first engineer. He worked with us or a few blueprints and just to get us up and running. I actually created the prototype, but then the prototype took on a life of its own. I was also working a full-time job. So it was just too difficult to maintain that. So that's why we looked at outsourcing some of the resources. But since then, I mean, we're mostly within the US now, but we have funding. But it also helped with, from an investment perspective, like when we did finally go for VC funding in our first seed round, we did actually have revenue already. And I think that helped a lot with driving the story as to why we were an investable company and why we grow. And we were scrappy then, we're definitely still scrappy now.
It's one of the things we've always been so impressed by you. When you think about, you mentioned you now have a mostly US team. Are there certain functions within an organization where you think proximity is actually quite important?
Absolutely. So we have mostly onshored everything except for a couple of things. So the way that kind of we've broken this out is with me, like I think it's really important to have face-to-face interaction. That's why even we started the company during the pandemic, but even then we were still hiring in mostly in New York. And we have continued to hire in New York and Boston. And it's kind of like worked out as like the engineering team is in New York and the marketing and the sales team's kind of in Boston, and it just kind of worked out naturally. But what's been really neat is just having the ability to have in New York, having like the product manager, the VP of engineering, and marketing all in one place. It just means that we can get a product to market really, really quick because we have everyone here. Plus the UI UX team is here as well. So it just makes it really simple for us to be able to collaborate, problem solve, and then get a product to market very quickly. There's certain roles that I don't think it really matters all that much where they are, like from a engineering perspective, but I do think the heads of the departments do need to be in a place where everyone can get together. We have hired a number of engineers in the Midwest, which has worked out really well for us, but all the heads are either in New York or in Boston.
Well, this is also the go-to-market podcast, so I am going to pivot us a little bit. And for anyone who's listening who doesn't know this, for a long time, Stas was the only salesperson at Compyl, and you closed all of the first very large customers yourself. And since then, you've been shifting, and I would say quite successfully shifting towards building from founder-led sales to a go-to-market machine. I'd love to start with your experience. What was it like to sign up your first customer? And how did that very first deal and organization feel compared to some of the other ones?
That is a good question. That first customer that I was talking about before, the one that's still with us now, I had a phone call with them and they asked for a call back on a Friday. And I thought for sure they're going to be like, oh no, like we decided to go a different direction. But it was like, okay, if this works, we're going to sign, send us an invoice. And that was, I think, in like July of 21. And that was a good feeling. And then from there, we kind of had a couple more intros to other customers and word of mouth started spreading. And up until last year, I mean, it was just myself and one other account executive that closed all the deals, and we were on all the calls together. And now we've expanded the team out quite substantially. So it's definitely been a shift. But again, the space is very complicated and the product is very complicated for sure. You need practitioners that understand the customer's pain points. And if you're putting on salespeople that don't understand that, they're just not going to do very well. So I'm still getting roped into a lot of calls and I'm happy to do so. But it's usually more towards the tail end rather than definitely not on first calls or discovery calls. But I think I'm still firmly in the founder-led sales, especially over a certain size customer. Slowly shifting off of that, but not entirely shifted out yet.
There's no replacement to being able to say, let me bring in my CEO. Oh, by the way, he's also been a CISO himself. I'd love to spend a little bit more time on that because I do think so many organizations struggle with shifting from the founder closing all of the deals, finding all the deals, maturing all the deals, closing all the deals himself to building a team. And any other experiences or advice you have from our listeners in terms of as you're beginning to ramp and build that team and teach them everything that you just inherently know in your head. Do you have strategies or things that you focused on?
When we first tried to bring in account executives, we went after, they were not from the SaaS space, let alone the security space. So we brought in, as a young, scrappy startup, we had to hire a whole bunch of people that we normally wouldn't be able to attract, especially not from a salary perspective. So we had to make it worth their while in equity and, promises that the company will do well and is now doing well. But, we had to bring on a bunch of people that would believe in the vision and the mission of the company. Well, I used that mentality all throughout up until we got to the sales side. And I tried that with a couple sales guys and I ended up, one came from an alcohol distribution sales background. One came from food compliance company and the other one came from B2B, very small contract, but high quantity ISP selling or something like that. Anyways, needless to say, they did not work out. And it was just painful. It's just going back to, depending on what the company does and what it sells, there's a lot of trust that has to be put into a company like us. We're dealing with our customers' data and the security. So they have to work with people that they trust, that understand their pain, that can walk the walk and talk the talk. That has become very apparent to us. We're only hiring experienced SaaS B2B salespeople now to fill the roles, including all of the sales engineers. And we have very well laid out plan for BDRs and how we scale them and our marketing material and sales material. We've put all that stuff together, but it did take 2.5 years to put all this stuff together and to figure all this stuff out. And there is no silver bullet for this. It's really just grinding it out and figuring this stuff out. The amount of times that I got on calls with experts or trusted board advisors, whatever, it really just comes down to just grinding it out until finding something that works for you and then getting that pattern and then repeating it.
It also seems like what you're saying is there's a lot of value to having a team that's able to put themselves in the mindset of the customer or at least speak the same language of the customer.
Absolutely.
And on that note, prior to Compyl, you were a CISO yourself. which is such a powerful perspective. And I imagine builds a lot of trust as you're talking to CISOs. Do you have any advice for other practitioners who may want to start a company themselves and are now trying to call on people in the role that they used to hold?
I think it's like the same thing like Warren Buffett said, like if you don't understand the space, then you really shouldn't invest in it. Entrepreneurship is not for everybody. It's way more difficult than I ever thought it was going to be. It's really, really tough. And I can only imagine how much tougher it would be or how impossible it would be if you don't actually understand the space or the people that you're selling into. I think it would be next to impossible. So understand the space, really find key differentiators and moat. And I didn't do this, but I wish I did, but like find test bed of potential customers and talk to them and refine a product with them before you ever start building. We just went out and started building and building and building. And then my mindset was always, we want to go after enterprise customers. So we built a really very vast, comprehensive platform, and it still is today, where a lot of the features, unfortunately, they did fall by the wayside as we built and grew. And that's also because technology is changing so fast as well, that a lot of the stuff that we built was no longer needed because it was replaced by AI or machine learning along the way. To answer your question, understand the space, test out the product, make sure that you actually have buy-in from people that are not friends or family. And if you can generate a little bit of revenue or even people that would be interested in potentially trialing or purchasing the platform, I think that would go a long way. Wireframe it before you build anything. And that would be my advice.
And it also sounds like, based on what you just said, view your time as an investment as well. And so make sure, to your point about Warren Buffett, that if your time is an investment, then make sure you know it really well and that you're excited about it and you want to wake up every day spending this time. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I definitely see it that way now. I think when we were building over COVID, that actually worked out really well personally because there's nothing to do but build. This is going back to like wireframe it, make sure that there's actually someone that wants to buy it. There's a path forward. I spent a lot of weekends and a lot of time building stuff that like would never see the light of day. And I'm sure that's still true today, but you want to limit that because time is valuable and you want to spend it on the things that really matter, like finding VCs and the right fit and partners along the way that can really help you drive the business once the product's actually built and ready to launch. Also, we had no idea what stealth mode was. If we ever do this again, definitely going to utilize stealth mode.
Awesome. Just because I'm sure a lot of our listeners are also building security companies as well. Do you have any advice for companies that want to sell to a CISO?
There's very few things that a CISO would buy from either CEO of a product or an account executive or whoever that might be. Going to C-suite is a really bad idea. You're not going to get very far. They're way too busy. They don't have time. They've seen it all. And if they're interested in anything, they'll go to a conference and hear a few people speak and then talk to a few different product owners there. But generally, like you want to identify who actually is dealing with the pain point of what you're trying to sell. So that might be a sales or a security engineer, help desk, service desk, whatever you want to call it, mid-level management, whoever actually is dealing with the pain that you're trying to address, and then build a relationship with them, understand if they've got budget, or if they got executive buy-in, and then build a relationship with them, and then work your way up to the CISO.
Sounds like a little bit. I think I heard you say this the last time you were visiting, but it's the question of who gets fired if they don't have this.
That's pretty much it.
Awesome. One big thing that we've seen from a market perspective is how compliance has now begun to impact many other parts of the business outside of the more traditional like security and compliance silo. Have you seen that as well?
The most obvious case is that business can't move forward with a deal because there's something just not in place or the organization isn't compliant with a framework or regulation. But we're also seeing this across the board from, again, it's the same thing I was talking about before. Like we're seeing organizations that have to comply with mass regulations in Singapore or Reg SP in the US or FCC or FCA regulations or NERC SIP regulations for energy and infrastructure, NIS2 for critical infrastructure in the UK. They are no longer just touching pure IT. There's a lot of different components that take into account. Is there a board? How often does the board meet? What do they discuss? Is there a risk management committee? What do they discuss? What's on the agenda? Have you proven that you can actually manage your risk? Do you have an incident management program? Do you have policies in place that are reviewed at least annually, but not just IT and security policies? Like, do you actually have like HR policies? Do you have financial policies? Do you have fraud controls in place? The compliance requirements for organizations is very much expanding. It's expanding quite drastically at the moment. And again, it's the same thing. Companies want to know that the company that they're buying from is buttoned up in all aspects of their business and they can handle and respond to an incident or a situation and they're not going to lose their customer data. I mean, that's ultimately what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing SOC 2 Type 2 as a requirement more and more frequently for startups, which I feel like, I don't know how many years ago, but many years ago was something that you probably wouldn't see until you were a more mature business.
The problem with that, though, is a lot of the times the SOC 2 Type 2, because it's very subjective and you can solve most of the SOC 2 controls or control objectives with a policy and not actually demonstrate technical controls in place. And you do need to have a mixture of both. The problem is there's a lot of companies that are skirting the genuine like goodwill nature of what the SOC 2 Type 2 is meant to do. And that's a problem in itself, probably not for this podcast, but like it's an interesting one for sure.
Maybe we can promise our listeners a follow-up podcast at some point.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, now we're going to just quickly go through the rapid fire go-to-market execution section. These are questions that we hear from startups and companies quite frequently, and we'd love our listeners to get your perspective on. The first one is, how did you close your first 10 customers, and what does that look like?
That was a lot of running around and a lot of warm intros and a lot of LinkedIn follow-ups and literally just trying to get in front of as many people and connections that I had as possible and utilizing my network just to show like what we're doing, what we're building. We certainly had no money for advertisement of any kind. We actually don't advertise now. That was really just grinding it out and getting in front of as many people as possible. The first 10 is probably the hardest, and then it gets easier and easier after that. But yeah, the first 10, we were just grasping at straws and building anything that anybody would ask and agreeing to any price, basically to do anything just to be able to win a contract and then get another logo and then leveraging that logo to get another logo and then kind of going from there.
It's amazing. It's all that grit that we were talking about at the beginning. We've been really, really impressed with you and the whole team. Next question is building a high accountability team and culture. So how do you think about building that without micromanaging people?
Yes, that is a very good question. We built the company in the middle of the pandemic. So we hired people that are very similar and like-minded that want to build something and build a real solution and really bought into the vision. We had a really strenuous hiring process and we spent a lot of time hiring the right people. We did get a couple duds as everybody always does, but we were able to suss them out very, very quickly and move forward without them. And that really drove the culture as well, because we're a super fast moving organization now. And whenever there's dead weight, everybody can feel it. And then we just need to jettison those people as quickly as possible. As brutal as it sounds, like this space is not for everybody. And it is very cutthroat, especially like when you look at your cash burn and where you need to get to for the next financing round. And that's the only way that startups can really operate and scale. But yeah, having a really rigorous hiring process and then just hiring for the right people. And we were hiring generalists for the longest time. And now we're hiring specialists. But the generalists, we really like, if they were not engineers, we really didn't care. Like, as long as they had determination, drive, and a willingness to learn, we could throw them into anything. And that's what we did for the first. Now we're finally starting to hire specialists. And that's how we did it.
Awesome. This is a slightly different one, which is as you think about fundraising and your term sheets and all of that, is the best term sheet just the one with the highest price? Or do you look for something else when you're doing fundraising?
I have been fortunate to have multiple term sheets at the same time, which I've heard is very rare. So we had opportunities to pick who we partnered with. And for us, it's really important. Like, I can't speak for the founders. We have a very clear vision and mission of where we're going, what we're trying to get to. We are the closest we've ever been to achieving that at the moment. We want people to take the same journey with us. We don't need a lot of direction or handholding in terms of what we're trying to do, but we do need people that will support us and be there with the good times and be there with the bad times. And picking the right partners is super important. And I would definitely say like vet them, because they're certainly going to vet you, and make sure that you talk to a couple of their portfolio companies and just really ask them very direct questions, right? What's it like working with them? What's it been like if there's been a confrontation? And definitely do your due diligence on investors. But I would also say everything takes twice as long, costs twice as much. So I would also consider like taking as much as you can upfront, just so you don't have to lose time doing another round of financing, because you will easily lose 2 quarters to that and be able to do nothing else.
Before we wrap, I've got 2 reflective questions just to give founders something to take back and potentially apply to their own journeys. The first one is, if you were to start your journey at Compyl all over again, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently?
I would start with a simpler platform and build on top of it. I would get buy-in, a couple customers lined up for it. I would definitely do it in stealth. I wouldn't announce it, what I was doing. And I would be very strategic in terms of picking the right partners along the way. And I would take as much money as possible for the first round just to be able to ensure that build a stable team product and start at least, or at least starting to scale it.
You've mentioned something that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, which is the value of being in stealth. Can you help me and our listeners understand that?
For sure. So like we came out and we weren't hiding what we were doing. We were building GRC right from the get-go. We were building enterprise GRC and a lot of the things just weren't ready for public consumption. So like while we were picking up new customers, we were having to build the plane as it was flying. And so a lot of like the customers that we would sign, they would expect it to work a certain way. It didn't. We'd have to like basically be a services company in the background while doing things manually to make up for any of the loss of functionality that the product actually did have. Whereas like I would just start with, I would come out of stealth, explain what the objective of what the platform is, what you're trying to do, who you're going after. And this is what the platform does. And then this is the vision and the roadmap of what it's going to look like going forward. And then get early adopters to come on board then so that you and them have the same idea of what they're signing up for, where the company is going, what you're building, rather than taking customer demands on the fly and trying to build them as quickly as possible without them being properly tested and vetted. So that's what I meant by stealth.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense.
And hire UI UX much earlier than you think you need to. That was definitely something that I completely overlooked. And yeah, that's come to bite us. But now we're in a good spot, but it took a long time to redo the UI UX.
What's one leadership lesson that you've learned that you wish more founders understood as they grow their business?
People management is hard. As I said before, this is not for everybody. I've seen a lot of people lose their cool and just make really irrational snap decisions and judgments. As a manager, like you have to always be relentlessly positive and upbeat because it reflects the rest of the organization. So when I was talking about like getting rid of people that don't fit the culture of the organization as quickly as possible, because negativity breeds negativity. So like you have to be a well-rounded person, understand that people are going through different things in their lives. And there's a lot of stuff that will come up in a startup that you will have to deal with that you just have to think through quickly and use as much data as possible for you to make that decision at that time, but you're never going to have a perfect data set. So I guess what I'm saying is you have to be prepared to make tough decisions with incomplete data sets. Managing people's emotions is very difficult, so be prepared for that.
Got it. Well, Stas, I want to say thank you. This has been really fun. And honestly, the opportunity to get to work with you and the team has been really fun for all of the Venture Guides team as well. You're building something really special and it shows. Between all of the conferences you're going to and everything else, it feels like Compyl has new announcements and updates almost every day.
We got to release one tonight.
There you go. Where can people go to learn more about you and your work at Compyl?
You can find me on LinkedIn. So I'm just Stas Bojoukha on LinkedIn, or you can get to us on Compyl, compyl.com. And we have a new website coming out actually at the beginning of June as well. So feel free to get in touch, or you can just email me. I'm just stas@compyl.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. And thank you, listeners, for joining us on Built Not Born, the podcast where we break down the real stories of startup execution. If you enjoyed this conversation with Stas Bojoukha, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review. And if you're a founder looking for guidance on scaling your startup, check out ventureguides.com. Thank you so much. Now let's get to work. Built Not Born, the Startup Go-to-Market podcast, is brought to you by Venture Guides. To find out more about Venture Guides and how our Venture Capital Plus guiding model helps early-stage startups build scalable go-to-market strategies and grow faster, visit ventureguides.com. And then make sure to search for Built Not Born in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, or anywhere else that you listen. Hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, and we look forward to building with you. On behalf of the team here at Venture Guides, thanks for listening. Until next time, keep building.